Want to be the first to experience the terror? Support my podcast on Patreon and receive early access to all my episodes. Plus, access a library of over 50 bonus episodes. The link is in the description below. You're 240 feet underwater, floating in darkness by the entrance to a deep cave. Before it stands a sign with large block letters and a simple warning. Stop! Prevent your death. Go no further. Though eerie, you're an experienced individual with a license as an advanced open water diver, with several trips within caves. You proceed, ready to map out this far unexplored region. Only a trimix tank and a mouthpiece are keeping you from an unpleasant demise. Proceeding within, you are shocked by the overwhelming darkness. You turn on your flashlight, which gives you a good view of the clear waters, but it also creates a bizarre sense of being trapped within the narrow passages. A line has been attached by the entrance, serving as a passive guide into the network before you. The plan is to extend it deeper into the network of caves, but should you lose it, there's no calling for help, no turning back, no hope. You'll get trapped and inevitably drown. Despite this, you keep moving deeper and deeper into the darkness. You eventually reach the end of the marked path, not even noticing the slight decline leading even further down into the depths of the ocean. After 30 minutes in the cave, you check your residual pressure gauge, estimating the time you have left before surfacing becomes an absolute necessity. With your trimix tank and a reserve, you have just over 2 hours underwater. 1/3 was reserved for the journey downwards into the cave, which happened so far without incident, leaving a generous margin of error. The second third is being spared for the outward trip, with the last third saved as a reserve. Then you glance at your dive computer, which lets you know that the depth has increased to almost 300 feet. Surprised, but not worried, you attach another point of the line, ensuring an easy trek back to the surface. Below you is a ground void of all life, just fine dirt and sand dragged in by the current. But while finishing up the line attachment, your tools slip, sinking down towards the sand. You react instinctively, pushing towards the bottom, just a tad harder than intended. Though you're still in control, your sudden movement dislodges the dirt from the ground, causing a sudden silt out. Left blind, your heart starts to race, and your respiration rate quickens. Adrenaline is the culprit, but you need to get it under control, lest the air in your tank runs out prematurely. Falling back on your training, you know you just need to find the line and pull yourself back to clear waters. You reach out your hand, knowing you left the line right above you, but there's nothing there to grab onto. The horrific realization does nothing but deepen your panic. You push upwards, frantically searching for your only rescue, but with a network of caves far more complex than first anticipated, you end up swimming further and further away from the exit, away from the only guide you had. Minutes pass, ticking down with the pressure gauge, counting away the oxygen left in your tank. But by some miracle, you manage to escape the silt cloud. You can finally see, and for just a moment, you start to calm down. That is, until you realize that you haven't the faintest idea where you are. You peer down to notice that you only have 1/3 of your oxygen left, the last third you so desperately needed for the ascent. Being nowhere near the exit, surviving has become a statistical impossibility. Though you're technically still alive, your death has been marked as a fixed point in history. It's only a matter of time before your air runs out and you drown, cold and alone in the depths of the ocean. These are the harrowing experiences turning many a diver away from the dangers of the deep waters. And the few lucky enough to survive such an incident would most certainly swear to never set foot in the ocean again. But among those, a select few react with the exact opposite response, gaining a newfound attraction to the concept of diving, needing to prove themselves against all odds. After surviving one of these cave incidents years prior, my soul was bound to the depths. In response, I took up rescue diving, swearing on my own grave to protect others from suffering the same horrific fate.
Hey, mate, ocean's that way.
David pointed out as we headed in the direction of Darwell Woods.
Yeah? Well, I'm just a pilot. Take it up with the team leader.
The man shot back, barely audible over the sound of the helicopter rotor whirring above us. Below were endless fields of green with a dense forest just beginning to appear on the horizon. A spectacle to be witnessed from such a height, but in spite of its beauty, I longed for the dark depths below. David turned to the rest of us, lowering his voice in annoyance.
Is he serious? Did he see us bored with diving gear? What does he think we're doing?
There's water in the woods too, David,
Maya argued.
If the kid has drowned, it's up to us to retrieve the body.
If the kid is drowned, it's no longer an emergency,
Andrew chimed in. Though callous, the man had a point. We'd been scooped up as an emergency response team, hearing the news of a young boy that had gone missing in the center of Darwell, presumably trapped underwater. Though details were scant, I too wondered why we were heading for the woods. It was an area I knew intimately through many excursions over the years, which is why I knew the place held no large bodies of water, lakes nor rivers.
What do you think, Rick?
Maya asked, pulling me out from my deep contemplation.
I'm just trying to figure out where we're supposed to dive, and how deep the place could possibly be to warrant a dive team.
There aren't any lakes in Darwell Woods,
Andrew explained confidently.
Lived around these parts all my life. Never seen a damn lake. We're going somewhere else.
He caught our attention, because though we'd explicitly been recruited for a rescue dive in an area with no ocean nor lakes, Andrew didn't seem all that surprised.
Oh, man of old age and great wisdom, please share with us your nuggets of information,
Maya let out sarcastically. Andrew, being his usual self, didn't even acknowledge Maya's quip. He just looked at each of us as if asking a wordless question uttered only in silence.
We're not just recreational divers. Hell, we're not even open water divers. We are cave divers.
He then turned to me with a half smile on his face.
Or what do you think, boss?
Though the thought had crossed my mind, it wasn't an idea that sat easy with me. A hidden cave in the forest might have gotten waterlogged during one of the many recent storms, but the aspect of an unexpectedly drowned cave came with many unforeseen risks, such as strong currents, mudslides, and cave-ins. And while I had no trepidation swimming around underwater caves, one caused by flash floods sent shivers down my spine. We'd been flying for an hour before we reached Darwell Woods, gliding through the air at a low altitude, heading for a set of given coordinates in the dead center of the forest. I started to wonder how we could possibly land in such dense vegetation, but as we neared our destination, a large opening I'd never seen before revealed itself, one practically designed for aerial rescues. Small figures started to appear amid the trees, wearing bright, reflective vests. A couple of them came running out into the clearing, waving at us to put the helicopter down. After a rough landing, we were met with half a dozen rescue workers. We stepped out with our tanks of various gas mixtures, wetsuits, and masks, met with almost relief by the crew greeting us.
Who's in charge here?
I asked. The crew turned to a scruff-looking middle-aged man who promptly introduced himself as Graham. He shook my hand and thanked us for coming, before gesturing for us to follow him towards the objective, situated half a mile within the forest. Luckily, the team helped us with the transportation of our heavy equipment, allowing us to gather strength for the mission. Once we started walking, Graham finally started to shed some light on the situation.
We were called 2 days ago after a 10-year-old kid went missing while camping in the woods with his parents. Leaving no trace behind, his parents had no choice but to seek help. But with no signal reaching this far into the wilderness, his dad decided to sprint the entire distance, until finally coming upon a small town, where he borrowed a landline to call us. By then, of course, nightfall had arrived, making the search almost impossible. Having no luck recovering the kid's tracks, we'd figured he'd been snatched up by some predator or fallen off a cliff. It wasn't until the break of dawn that we realized how close to camp he actually had been. We were led deeper into the woods, where volunteers had parked their dirt bikes and even some off-road vehicles that had by some miracle made it through the vegetation. Once we reached the rescue site, we were met by 24 rescue workers and excavation equipment. A pile of dirt stood in the center, left behind as they'd been digging down for something I could only assume was a thus far undiscovered cave. Turns out,
Graham continued.
The ground around these parts is riddled with underwater rivers, creating a massive network of waterlogged caves, one of which the kid accidentally stepped into through a 2-foot wide hole hidden beneath some shrubs. A hole just large enough for a skinny kid to slip into, but too small for a grown adult. Now, we've been working on expanding the hole for our team to go down and extract the boy, but that's all very unfortunate. But where do we come in?
David asked impatiently. He came across rude, but I could tell he was just nervous about the aspect of diving into waterlogged caves created by strong currents. It wasn't a situation we'd step into lightly. Graham stopped dead in his tracks, annoyed by the interruption.
If you'd let me finish,
he almost demanded. David looked at me for confirmation. I just gave him a gentle nod. It was a polite gesture to make him shut up, and a command he diligently followed.
To better assess the area we were about to enter, and to get proof of life, we sent down a camera attached to a rope. The hole extends 27 feet below ground in a narrow tunnel, before opening up into a massive chamber, which extended another 50 feet down into a large pool of water, with depths we're unsure of.
And the boy? I asked.
He survived the fall, and had even managed to swim to a small plateau along one of the cave walls. He'd been sitting there for more than a day waiting for a rescue.
Graham went on, but didn't seem relieved by the statement.
You're not happy about finding him alive?
I asked.
Well, we were ecstatic, but we knew that deep down we had no means of communicating with him effectively, and expanding the hole to be large enough for an adult to descend through would take hours. So, we pulled the camera back up and packed up a survival kit with water, food, heating blankets, and the like. We left him alone down there for another hour and a half while preparing it all, before sending it back down alongside the camera and a walkie.
And I kept pushing, noticing a prominent feeling of unease in his voice.
The boy was gone.
Gone? Gone where?
Maya chimed in.
We don't know. The water levels hadn't risen, and there were no visible ledges to hold on to. It was as if he entered the water again just to drown. All he left behind was the backpack he'd worn during the fall.
Before Graham could continue, he was approached by one of the rescue workers, who announced that the expansion had been completed. The hole now stretched 4 feet wide, more than enough space for us to descend with diving equipment. But the hope of finding the boy alive was all but lost.
Graham, when did you last see the boy?
I asked.
4 hours ago.
He almost mumbled.
That's when we requested rescue divers.
Pardon my bluntness,
I began.
but what makes you think we can save him at this stage?
He paused, scratching his head in uncertainty of what he was about to say next.
The ground below is highly porous, as I said, and we suspect there are several other chambers connected by a network of caves. Our main theory is that the kid slipped into the water and got caught by a current. If he was lucky, he might have ended up in another air-filled chamber.
I wouldn't bet on it, I responded bluntly.
Maybe not, but until we have a body, we're going with the assumption that he's still alive. So, the question is, are you up for the task?
I turned to my team, standing stoically behind me. Apart from Andrew, neither of them wished for this particular job, but none were willing to back down from a challenge, dangerous as it might be. Alas, with the limited information we had, it was my task to decide whether or not we'd risk our lives for a boy that almost certainly had perished in the waters below. As bleak as the situation might seem, as long as a sliver of hope remained, we had to try.
We'll go down,
I said. A glimpse of relief appeared in Graham's eyes as he gestured towards the pile of dirt lying next to a hole into the abyss.
Right this way,
he said. We promptly gathered around the 4-foot-wide hole in the ground, which extended down into an impossibly dark abyss. For a moment, my thoughts wandered to the young boy, whose name I hadn't even bothered to ask. To me, he'd been just another body to recover, but a part of me inexplicably clung to hope. Against all logic, I felt as if he still lived down in the caves, surviving the elements against all odds, in the dark, alone, cold, and afraid.
Rick,
David asked, jolting me back to reality.
you ready?
I nodded, making sure my equipment was firmly secured to my person before getting ready to attach myself to the harness. A metal tripod stood above the hole, with a winch ready to slowly lower us down into the cave with our diving equipment and body cams.
I'm going first,
Andrew announced, grappling his harness to the cable. While Andrew was the oldest and by far the most experienced member of the team, he wasn't the leader. It was a fact he was prone to forget, unwilling, or ashamed to take orders from a younger man. We locked our eyes, silently battling over control. But he stood firm, patiently waiting for me to comment on his insubordination.
Just making sure the place is safe before you descend, boss. You'll take the lead from there.
He half suggested, half ordered. Go ahead then, I said, knowing an argument would do little more than delay the already sensitive mission. Once Andrew had vanished in the darkness, I followed suit. The winch whirred to life, slowly lowering me into the hole. On the way down, my equipment gently hit the edge of the rocky wall, causing me to squeeze my body tighter around the cable. I took a deep breath, preparing to be swallowed by the ground, the first bout of worry setting in my bones. Within a minute, I'd been completely engulfed by darkness. I activated my flashlight, inspecting the rocky surroundings that seemed to narrow in around me with each descending foot. Though not a claustrophobic person underwater, the bizarre echoes reverberating through air-filled caves sent shivers down my spine. Every whir from the winch and every crumble of rock loudly shooting through the air. Then, as I finally passed the threshold into the chamber, the walls expanded in all directions. I exited the narrow tunnel to find myself suddenly hanging in an enormous void of complete darkness. Below, I heard soft splashing sounds from Andrew moving around in the water, 50 feet below.
Andrew?
I called down.
How's it looking down there?
No response. The splashes had already fallen silent, which meant he descended underwater to inspect the area, all without waiting for the rest of the team. Annoyed, but not surprised, I spent my remaining descent scanning my surroundings. The place felt impossibly large, too long and wide for my beam to hit all edges of the cave. Even the plateau lining the water's surface lay shrouded in darkness, only visible due to the reflective surface of the boy's backpack. And as I got a tad further down, I noticed Andrew's nitrox tank and mouthpiece also resting on the plateau.
Andrew?
I called out, realizing he'd gone under without his diving equipment. The distraction was enough that I couldn't prepare myself for the impact with the ice-cold water, which sent a shockwave through my body, even with the wetsuit protecting me. I quickly detached myself from the harness and swam towards the plateau, searching the depths below for Andrew's flashlight. Just as I started to worry, Andrew emerged from below the surface, jumping onto the plateau with ease. He gasped for air, turning to me with his trademark smirk plastered across his face.
What the hell were you doing?
I asked, as relieved as I was annoyed by the man's antics.
Sorry, boss. Just assessing the caves,
He said, in between breaths.
You were supposed to wait.
I explained firmly.
Just trying to save us some time.
He shot back. Putting aside the disobedience, I refocused on the task ahead, trying to avoid another staring contest with a man too stubborn to be reasoned with.
What did you find?
I reluctantly asked.
2 tunnels. One on the east side, one on the northwestern edge. Both extend further down below. There's a mild current pulling between them, leading into the northwestern tunnel. Anything else? Some small animal carcasses scattered around. Victims of the hole, I suppose.
As Andrew described the situation, Maya and David both descended into the waters, gently splashing into it.
Fuck! It's cold!
Maya exclaimed, rushing over to the plateau. We gathered around on the solid surface. Andrew repeated what he discovered.
We're going to head down the northwestern passage, follow the current to find the kid. Just follow our regular protocol and we'll be back before dinner.
So, you're in charge now? I asked, immediately ashamed that I let him get to me. He glared back in return, enjoying the fact that he could get a rise out of me. Truth be told, there was a reason I'd been hired as the diving leader over Andrew. A reason from his past he didn't know I was privy to. One I struggled with all my might not to reveal to him.
Whoa, a dick measuring contest?
David asked, futilely trying to break the tension.
Should I get a ruler, or should we focus on the job? I'd get the ruler, to be honest, but I left it on the chopper. So in the interest of saving time, maybe we should get going.
Using David's joke as an excuse to break eye contact with Andrew, I returned my gaze to the water and sighed.
Fine, what Andrew said. I'll take the lead, never break the line. You got it?
Yes, sir, Maya said. With that, we inserted our mouthpieces and dove under the surface. In the darkness, our flashlights were the sole method of guiding our way. The water was perfectly clear, allowing our beams to hit the bottom on each side. Only when shined directly into the tunnel did the reach of the beam prove insufficient. The animal carcasses Andrew had described were mere skeletons without even a hint of flesh left behind. But they didn't appear all that old, as if something had fed off the meat and left the bones behind. Though a peculiar thought, I had no way of communicating it with the team, except to point and gesture, which wouldn't have served any purpose but to worry them further. So, I ignored the sight, leading my team into the northwestern passage with Andrew swimming by my side. Withstanding the current proved to be an easy enough task, and I turned around frequently to make sure the team didn't split up. Maya swam in the middle, with David at the back, carrying the end of a line still attached to the plateau. Should we end up getting lost, we only had to follow the cable back to safety. After a few minutes following a gentle descent, the passage took a steep dive into the abyss. From there, it split up into several smaller tunnels, with the largest of them all being the only way to head straight down. The current we decided to follow, of course, took the path downwards. I glanced at my depth gauge, which displayed a depth of 32 feet. It reassured me, knowing we still had almost 100 feet to work with before being forced to ascend. We paused, with the rest of the team turning to me as they awaited orders. I nodded, turning to dive down further as the depth gauge counted up. We moved with the current through the descending passage, ignoring any diverting tunnels, twisting and turning into a messy network of caves. We only stopped once every so often to attach the rescue line along the wall. At 57 feet down, I noticed something different hanging alongside the otherwise lifeless cave wall. A deep red vine clinging to the crumbly wall's surface, with small roots digging into the side, resembling blood vessels. A sort of plant I'd never before seen, existing where no life was supposed to have developed. I pointed to the thing, more curious than anything, but the rest of the team seemed uninterested, all eager to keep the descent going. Once we reached 80 feet, the pit finally turned horizontally with a slight downward slope. Several side passages extended on each side, some even returning back up into dead ends. More vines hung along the walls, each bigger than the last, stretching out from the tunnel we were following. Wondering how its surface felt, I decided to touch one of them. It was squishy, but rough like hundreds of threads tied together, akin to exposed muscle. It twitched in response, releasing its roots from the wall and retracting ever so slightly. I realized then that it wasn't a plant, but some sort of fleshy appendage appearing to feed off the wall. While distracted by the odd growth, Andrew had taken the lead. He delved further into the tunnel with Maya and David in tow. David gave me a quick glance to ensure I didn't fall too far behind. Having no voice to order a halt, I had no choice but to follow behind. By then, we'd already been in the water for 40 minutes, carefully following the main current through the network of caves. 1/3 of our allotted time had passed. Though finding our way back would be an easier task, with a safety line guiding our way, we weren't about to turn back anytime soon. On the chase to take the lead from Andrew, I realized just how narrow the passage had gotten. Even if I sped up, I had no way of getting past the rest of the team without risking getting stuck. So, I was left in the back, waiting for the path to widen once again. Distracted by the increasingly claustrophobic cave, I failed to keep a close eye on the depth gauge. With the slope going at an almost invisible decline, I really didn't think much of it. Not until I started to notice the first signs of nitrogen narcosis, an undying feeling of anxiety not warranted at that stage during the mission. Unknown to us, we managed to reach a depth of 150 feet, a fact the rest of the team hadn't appeared to notice, despite our many experiences with exactly such situations. I reached out to tap David's foot, only to notice him getting pulled away by the increasing strength of the current. Then, the passage came to a sudden end, leading into another pit in the ground, one which Andrew dove headfirst into, going deeper into the caves. I tried to brake, hoping they'd notice, but the current pulled me in as well. It plopped us into a large, underwater chamber. Once more, I felt as if we were floating in a void of vast darkness, with the bottom of the room endlessly far below, out of reach of our lights. We were now 200 feet below the surface, with God knows how much space beneath us. On the roof above us, I noticed how thick the growths had gotten, turning from vines to massive stems with dark veins running along them, leading deeper into the caves. They pulsated along the wall, sucking the little nutrients they could find from the walls. I waved at the team, starting to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis take a hold of my body. Where the rest of the team might have felt a drunken sense of confidence, I was suffering the opposite effect. I wanted to abort the mission and return to the surface, but Andrew was fixated on the idea of reaching the cave's end. He gestured to a point far off on the other side of the chamber where the current seemed to be leading us. There hung a faint light emerging from another opening in the cave walls. Though within reach of the remaining air we had, it meant a further descent of about 50 feet. It was a risk I wasn't willing to take without suitable gas. While Andrew kept wordlessly insisting, Maya and David drifted to my side, both realizing the dangerous situation we were about to enter. If we kept diving, we risked getting disoriented enough to lose our bearings, ending with the four of us drowning in a cold tomb. Knowing he stood no chance of convincing us, Andrew started following us back up to the hole in the chamber ceiling, where we secured the last line attachment. But before we could reach the hole, David, too, noticed the bizarre growths on the wall. He got closer to inspect them, reaching out his hand to gently touch them. In response, a dozen smaller roots detached from the wall, but instead of retracting away like I'd witnessed in the shallower parts, these roots reached out for David, wrapping themselves around him. With Maya and Andrew already swimming through the exit in the ceiling, they didn't notice David's struggle. Large amounts of dust and dirt emerged from the crumbly wall where the roots detached, causing an instant silt out. I tried flashing my light at the rest of the team, but the emerging fog was too thick for my beam to penetrate. So, I pulled the knife from my belt and started slashing at the vines wrapped around David. The growths were easy enough to cut through, but the sheer number of them made it a futile task, and with more emerging, pulling David further down into the depths, I knew I stood no chance of saving him. Still, in absolute desperation, David latched onto my hand, pulling me down with him. Again, I tried to cut the vines away from him, but in the chaos, I managed to drop my knife, letting it sink into the infinite abyss below. Getting a final glance at the depth gauge as we got pulled down, I realized we were just shy of 300 feet below the surface. Nitrogen narcosis had become an absolute certainty. I felt my body grow weaker, terror setting in my soul alongside a sense of absolute hopelessness. I could tell David was experiencing the same effects, because his grip slowly loosened, finally letting go of me before the creature snatched him away towards the light in the wall. There I hung in the void, no longer knowing which way was up or down. I could feel my mind quickly fading away, darkness occupying my peripheral vision. I knew then that I was going to drown. But then I felt something wrap around my arm, reaching out through the cloud of silt. Not a vine, but a hand, pulling me away. Too confused to understand, much less fight it, I let my mind slip into a deep state of sleep, no longer worried what would happen to me. Seconds, minutes, even hours could have passed before I finally regained consciousness. I was still underwater, being dragged through narrow tunnels with the depth gauge showing a slowly decreasing number on my wrist. I looked up to find Andrew pulling me by my arms, dragging me back to safety. Once we finally breached the surface, Maya and Andrew wrapped me in my harness and attached me to the cable. As I ascended up out from the cave, I started to regain my senses. I wondered what I'd seen down there, if it had been a product of my feeble mind in the depths, or if it had been real. But David had been taken. That wasn't a hallucination, and I had failed to save him. The rescue team in the forest immediately tended to me. Luckily, the nitrogen narcosis had caused no lasting damage, but I was a bit banged up. As the rest of my team reached the surface, the initial despair and confusion had turned to something else entirely, an incessant feeling of anger.
You killed him,
I mumbled, still too weak to shout. Andrew approached me, bent down to my level and spoke in a hushed tone.
What was that? It was your fault. You killed David,
I let out, an accusation directed at him for failing to check his depth gauge.
I just saved your life.
Andrew said as he helped me up on my own two legs.
A life that wouldn't have needed saving if you'd just let me take the lead. I was trying to find that damned kid,
was his response. I paused, noticing a crowd of people gathering around us. Though they hadn't yet heard the content of our argument, it was easy to notice the animosity between the two of us. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a mere whisper.
You know, this is why I'm in charge. Don't think for a second that I don't know about your past reckless behavior. This is what happens when you're the one in charge.
Stop it, please,
Maya said, coming between us.
What happened to him? Where's David?
Ending our standoff, we both turned to Maya. Neither of us sure how to explain why David hadn't come back up with us. I began, still not entirely sure what I'd experienced down in the depths.
The growths, he was taken by them.
What?
Maya asked, confused.
David got lost in the silt out,
Andrew explained.
I couldn't find him. He must have followed the light in the depths, thinking it was one of our flashlights.
That's not what happened.
I shot back, almost yelling.
These things down there, they wrapped around him and pulled him away.
The rescue team stood idly by, staring at us in disbelief. None of them had realized just how deep the caves were. Much less could they comprehend the horrors that existed within the network. Though I must have come across as crazy, I no longer cared.
It was a hallucination caused by the nitrogen narcosis,
Andrew responded, but his usual confidence seemed just a tad faded. With him diving into the silt to save my life, he too must have seen the tendrils wriggling around. He just wasn't ready to admit it. Even so, I paused to reconsider the fact that David might just have drowned. I looked at Andrew. It was clear that doubt was filling his eyes, a fact that just strengthened my own resolve. It had to have been real.
I made a mistake,
Andrew finally said.
I didn't notice the decline within the cave, and because of that, David got swept away.
He went on, directing his attention to the entire rescue operation in a ruse to regain some control of the situation.
We're not giving up, because amidst the chaos, we found an air pocket just 50 feet deeper than we managed to get. If David truly did follow the light, he might still be alive. Hell, with the current leading directly past it, I'd bet on the kid being in there too.
Whatever Andrew was playing at, it didn't put me at ease. Down at these depths, there was no way either of them had survived. Even if the light did emerge from an air pocket, who's to say it held breathable air?
It's not over yet,
he said as a final note, before leaving the crowd behind to get more equipment.
What are you doing?
I asked.
Getting Trimix gas,
Andrew stated coldly.
For what purpose?
Anger rose within me, as if David's death hadn't been enough. Andrew still seemed to intend another futile dive into the horrors of the depths, but it wasn't until he confirmed it before a whole new world of fear came crashing over me. And as he spoke these words, I realized that our nightmare was far from over.
What do you think, Rick? We're going to get David back.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.